that puts me off going on a big road trip, you know, because I'm just going to go down there and get absolutely annihilated by someone who's having a bit. Hello everyone and welcome to our channel. So today we're going to be having a look at Lost in the Pond, specifically how British and American road trips are very different.
Distance comes to mind first.
Obviously distance.
And width of roads.
We don't really have, we don't have a massive road trip, do we? Like, when I think of a road trip, I naturally think of America. And, you know, like, it just reminds me of, like, when I, you know, like the American Pie movies and things like that, on Road Trip, the actual movie, where they've got to really travel, like, cross-state, like, you know, it takes them days, and all the way and everything that goes wrong and happen, you know. Here it's like,
doesn't seem to be a
road
thing.
trip, okay, oh, I'm there already. You know?
Yeah, maybe 4 hours, maybe 6 hours, but it's not a multiple day affair.
Definitely
I think
not.
you can make it from I've read this recently,
Okay.
from the westernmost point.
Westernmost point being what?
Like
Cornwall?
southwestern, yeah.
Cornwall, okay.
Up until like the other top end of Scotland.
Yeah.
In 12-ish hours.
Oh, for real? Okay, so
yeah.
You could probably
Obviously you wouldn't be able to drive 12 hours constantly.
No, you'd obviously split it out. I don't know if you'd do that in one day. It might be a 2-day affair.
If you've got 2 drivers at least, or 3 drivers, you could keep going if you wanted to.
But I suppose that's not really that fun, though, is it? Because you're not taking anything in. You're just driving and, you know, aiming.
You do want the whole point of a road trip is to stop and see the sights where you are. Maybe stay overnight, have a nice meal somewhere.
And also sometimes when you're driving, you just go through some really quaint little locations, don't you? And it's nice to just stop and take it in a little bit.
Yes.
Anyway, should we have a look?
Let's have a look how they're different.
Let's go.
Hello. My wife and I recently got back from a visit to West Virginia, and on that trip it got me thinking, how do road trips compare between my homeland of Britain and the United States? And with America being the land of car culture and Britain that of public transit, Americans might be thinking, is a British road trip even a thing? And yes, it is, but in my experience of doing road trips in both countries, it's a very different thing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but one other journey that I've been on recently is the long march to 1 million subscribers. If you've done that, thank you. If you haven't, do that now. In the meantime, here are 5 ways that British and American road trips are very different. Now, you can't really compare and contrast road trips in the United States with road trips in Britain without talking about the distance involved. So when we drove from Chicago to West Virginia, it was something like 400 miles. And if you were to take that distance as a percentage of the distance from the East Coast to the West Coast, it's not that much. However, if you were to do the same thing in Britain, you would end up in the sea. The point is, everyone knows at this point, America much larger than Britain. But what happens with that is that once you move to the United States, even having grown up in Britain, your perspective of distance changes. You see, it used to be that when I was a kid, we'd drive from Grimsby, my hometown, down to the southwest coast, and it took a few hours. We thought that was an eternity, because in British terms, that is. Remember, we're a country that's the size of Wyoming. But what struck me on this road trip recently is that I didn't really consider it that long at all. I mean, granted, I am now in my 40s, so my lower back felt it, but my brain didn't. You know, it was as if this was a normal thing to do. Of course, there's one thing that I think probably helps Americans get used to the idea of driving a bit further than we might in Britain, and that's the size of our vehicles. I may have mentioned it before, but not only is the country much bigger than the United Kingdom, but so are the cars. Not for us, we have a Prius. Yep. But you will see on American roads plenty of either trucks, which is great for transporting stuff, or those minivans. Now, that's not to say that we don't have either of those two things in Britain. They're just not as widely embraced as they are here. I've experienced this. I've travelled again to West Virginia years ago in a minivan because we had multiple people coming with us, and honestly it was hell now that I think about it, because there were too many people. We'd overestimated the space. But I could see a situation in where the minivan would be great. I'd have the whole 3 back seats to myself, and then everybody else has to squeeze together in front of me, because that's just who I like my personal space. America gives me that. just not in a Prius. In Britain, we're all about smaller vehicles. I think when I was a kid, we had a Fiat Uno, tiny hatchback, and I remember we drove fairly long distances in that. Of course, I was a child. I did silly things like, oh, lift my legs up onto the seat, or put them across my brother, or in my mum's face. And I was smaller, so it was easier. I mean, this is doing a disservice to our larger vehicles, but the point is, pound for pound, you don't have quite as much space in British cars. So it's a good job we don't drive as far. But another thing that helps put into perspective the long distances that we may or may not be travelling is how we pass the time. I've noticed that it is a common feature of road tripping in either country to play a game. It's just that the game in question may well differ. Take, for example, road trip bingo. Played in both countries, this is where passengers whip out a bingo card and check off the things they see. Whoever completes their card first wins. However, it's become clear that the items on a US bingo card don't always match those on a British one. And that's because the scenery and the things that occupy it differ somewhat on either side of the pond. For example, the UK's sheep population is around 7 times greater than that of the US, meaning it's literally impossible to have a road trip in the UK without seeing them a lot. Then again, unless you're driving through the 4 states that have banned it, the same thing might be true in the US when it comes to billboards. I became aware of a game growing up called Spotto, and this is where you basically look out for a yellow car and then the person who sees it says, Spotto. But after I moved to the US and I was driving around with my wife, she brought to my attention something I'd never heard of called pediddle. And believe it or not, that's not something that you do at a rest stop. This is another game. You and others are on the lookout for a car whose headlight is out, and when you see that, you're supposed to say pediddle and hit the roof, apparently, in order to determine who it was who said it first. And another pastime specific to the US is the license plate game. This is where passengers observe traffic for the license plates of different states, the ultimate goal being to tally up plates from all 50 states. No equivalent for this exists in the UK, where real license plates, regardless of region, are plain old yellow. Spotto. That said, we do have a different number plate game in which we might look out for number plates containing, say, a certain letter or number. But the biggest thing that I've noticed is that Americans are far more likely to break out into song. I thought this was a trope of the films because it happens in National Lampoon's Vacation and many others, until I got into a car with my wife's family. Take me home to the place. In Britain, I'm not saying we don't ever do that, but I think most of us are probably a bit self-conscious about the way we sing, and so that doesn't happen as often. And if it does, we'd have to be drunk, and if we're drunk, we shouldn't be using a motor vehicle. What I'm saying
It is true though. I don't think I've ever sung in the car with anyone else.
What about I Spy? Is that something that...
When I was younger, a little bit I Spy.
Because we see that, or I remember seeing that in American movies a lot. I Spy with my little eye.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that a few times. To be honest, nowadays, for me, it's just like I do it mentally in my head, actually. Maybe I'm a bit crazy. But I just look at number plates. So we have the formation of ours has like 3 numbers at the end, 3 letters at the end, doesn't it? On our foot. Yeah. Well, I am just trying to make a word out of those 3 letters, you know. Very crude and God knows what else, you know. But that's pretty much what goes through my head when I'm driving. I'm just like, oh God, there's one of them.
Naughty.
Yeah.
Stretching your legs.
Now, it's one thing that Google Maps will tell me, ooh, look, it's 9 hours to travel from here to there. But what that doesn't take into account is the fact that you're going to have to stop a lot, especially since we have a dog with us. So along the way, we got out at what Americans know as rest stops. And a lot of the time, rest stops in the United States are sort of small buildings that usually house some bathrooms, as well as pamphlets displaying places to go in the local area. Occasionally, of course, you do find those larger rest stops that have a full-on food court and things like that.
Services, really,
as well. In Britain, there are 1 or 2 major differences when it comes to these outlets. Firstly, they're not called rest stops. They're known as motorway service areas. And these are usually the big kind of rest stops. You have your food courts, you have your toilets. You also have a lot more parking space. Partly that's going to be down to the fact that even though we're about...
Yeah, I think a lot of them have showers.
Really?
And obviously petrol station and attached to it and all of that.
about the size of Wyoming. We have nearly twice the population of California. And this might also account for the fact that your parking spot within this car park is usually timed. But it's also down to the fact that ample space is afforded to trucks, often known as lorries in Britain. It should be noted that the US concept of truck stops, in other words, stops used exclusively by trucks, are not nearly as common in the UK. The other thing to note here is that at British rest stops, there's usually a hotel attached to it in case you need to stay there overnight. You don't typically find this at American rest stops because most towns or cities have a complex of hotels somewhere in its vicinity. Britain also has hotels, the likes of Travelodge and Premier Inn. And I'm not going to spend this time boring you with the differences between British and American hotels because I did that in a previous video. But what I am going to say is that there's a cheaper alternative in the United States that a lot of road trippers capitalize on, and that alternative is motels. Motels did originate in the United States as a portmanteau of motor hotels, and they are bog standard, about the term I would use for every motel that I've ever stayed in. There's no swimming pool, there's no jacuzzi or hot tub or anything like that. It's basically just a room, and then you've got the manager's office. It's like in Psycho. We've all seen the Bates Motel. Most motels feel like that. I've never been murdered, as proven by the fact that I'm still doing this video, but I have felt like there's somebody in the room with me. And in fairness, I've seen some horrendous horror movies based around motels, which kind of does put me off a little bit.
Yeah.
He's into your thing, the guy's spying on you through cameras.
Yes, and anyone can come into a room at any time.
Yeah, I don't know, it puts me off a little bit.
And because they all each room has access from the outside, it feels like there's not much security. It's just your room and your little bubble.
Yeah, and
you're not in a big building like a hotel and you have a room inside.
That's true, yeah.
Multiple doors to break to get to you. There's just that one door.
Pull you out that one door, sling you in the van, and off you go.
Done.
Out in the field somewhere, buried in a hole.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's actually one thing about America is all the horror. Vast majority of them originate or are filmed in the States, right? You know, you got your Hills Have Eyes and all that sort of stuff, and you think that puts me off going on a big road trip, you know, because I'm just going to go down there and get absolutely annihilated by someone who's having a bit of a bad day and just, you know, needs to take it out on poor little me.
They will be the ones to say, I've actually been murdered once.
Yeah, that's it. Or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, there's so many of them, isn't there? Yeah, I'm not too sure, guys. I'm not too sure about the old road trip thing over there. By the fact that I'm still doing this video, but I have felt like there's somebody in the room with me, and it's usually my wife, and everything's fine. From the British side of things, I have two things to say here. Firstly, because we don't travel such great distances, there might be an argument that we don't really need to stop off anywhere en route to where we're actually ending up. So a lot of the time we don't end up making that sort of overnight stay in the middle of our journey. But if we were to do it, in my experience, we used to just check into one of those Premier Inn hotels or a travel lodge. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's normal among all Brits who travel, or if it's just another indication that my family is really middle class. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you've been on a road trip in Britain and America and what your observations were. In the meantime, I'm going to go and read about what to do in West Virginia, even though I am now home. While I'm doing that, here's a video I did back in the day about the hotel differences between Britain and America. You'll watch that next. Until next time, goodbye.
All right. Yes, sir. We'll watch that next.
It's distance related mostly.
Mostly, yeah. And obviously what you get to do along the way and the options you have when you need to stop, sort of thing.
But it's very true. I mean, realistically, if you're going on a road trip here, it's like, what, 5-6 hours generally at max? You don't go further than that.
Yeah. And if you do, you plan an overnight stay in a hotel somewhere along the way where you would like to visit anyway, or
of course, because you wouldn't want to drive 12 hours because you just wouldn't see everything on the way, and it kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? The whole point of going on a road trip is to see things.
Yeah, I guess, you know, when you have that sort of distance to cover, you make something out of it. It's not just like, oh, let's just get this 12 hours out the way. No, let's allow an extra day and make it a nice road trip. That's what we would do anyway.
I mean, we've never really experienced a road trip in the States, probably because I don't want to get murdered, based on the films I've seen, clearly. But
you want to do Route 66?
No, it would be cool. I'm joking. I would love to do a bit of a road trip.
Yeah.
You've not seen enough movies.
I've probably not seen enough.
I've seen too many movies. That's
but you know, this is real life. It's not movies. You're not just gonna get murdered at every corner, or attempted to.
I'll let her
You're not
get-
that
I'm going to
important.
let you get caught, and I'm going to be running.
I'm a fast runner, I'll have you know.
You haven't seen me in panic mode yet. Fight or flight.
Oh dear.
So I'd love to get an RV or something. Actually, can anyone drive an RV, or do you need a specific license for it? It's quite a
I
big.
guess it depends how big
It's kind
it
of
is.
big, aren't they? Well, they're not small though by any means. They're like driving a bus.
Not really. They're not that long.
Are they not?
Not all of them. You can get obviously big ones, but you can get like a medium size, like what Jolly had. You don't need a special driver's license for that.
Do you need a license for that, guys? If we, I mean,
You
we
need
have
a license, but not a special license.
We have a standard car license, so we can drive. You know,
anything
any
up to
normal
a couple
car.
of tons or something.
Up, I think,
Or like
up
50.
to
Was it 50?
I think our limit is. I think I know the first
17.5 tons or something.
7.5. I think it is because I think the first HGV license is 17 tons.
Right.
So I don't.
So
think,
anything under that, perhaps.
to an extent, yes.
Okay.
I think there is a limit, and I can't remember what it is. Let us know, guys. Otherwise, you know, happy days. But yeah, if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.